אני מקווה שכולם שומעים אותי. היום יש לנו אורחים מקנדה, ובמיוחד פרופסור סימי גרוסמן, ולכן הסמינר יתנהל באנגלית, וגם אני אעבור לאנגלית. So next is happy to host Professor Simi Grossman and Mr. Sam Carmon, who's not going to be talking today but attends this seminar. They will share with us some of their experiences in doing businesses in North America. Professor Simi Grossman is the partner and co-founder of GGS Canada, a company specializing in international trade facilitation. Professor Grossman is also a part-time professor at one of Toronto's leading business and technology colleges, teaching global business strategy and international marketing at postgraduate level. He is currently a board member of a medical software company specializing in ECG and arrhythmia management. He has held senior product management, sales and marketing positions in large companies, and he has also consulted for the Israeli Economic Mission to Toronto, Canada. In collaboration with partner Sam Carmon, GGS Canada and CBE are currently engaged with a number of Israeli companies, assisting them with identifying strategic investors, as well as preparing them for entry into global markets through business development, strategic partnership, and a wide range of marketing services. And that's why I asked Professor Grossman to join us today and share with us some of his experiences, and I'm sure we will all be able to learn from it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Orna. Thank you, Zohar. I'm just clicking over now. Hopefully you can see my screen. Okay. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, just put your PowerPoint.
Okay. All right. Can you see that?
Yes, please.
Okay. So can everybody see the screen, my PowerPoint?
Yes, Simi, please continue.
Okay. All right. Okay, so I want to thank you for the Hagdama. I will speak in English. If there's any questions or something that you want further clarification on, please let me know. If it doesn't come across in English, I'm happy to try and explain in Hebrew as well. So as I want to mention in terms of our introduction, GGS Canada is a consulting service. We work with international companies, primarily Israeli companies, in an area that is becoming popularly known as trade facilitation, international trade facilitation. And essentially it helps companies, local companies from different countries who are looking to expand into global markets. Specifically, our focus is on the Canadian and the US market. That's where we specialize, and that's where we do most of our work. In terms of market focus, you can see there's 5 key sectors that we play in, but most of our work, certainly in the recent months and years, has been in the biomedical area on the one side, and then technology on the other. So most of the companies in our current portfolio are in those areas, although we do have a couple of clients in mobile and wireless, as well as renewable energy, and a few companies in the security area as well. But biomedical and technology takes up most of our time. In terms of key deliverables, logically speaking, most companies who are looking to expand into foreign markets, into global markets, are looking for typically first and foremost investment. Then they're looking for strategic partners, and then they're looking for marketing services. So those are the 3 areas that we focus on and that we spend most of our time on, and where we can provide value add. So investment. Certainly in the case of Israeli companies, many of the startup companies, they typically would have initial investment, whether it's either angel funding or friends and family as they call it, or in many cases they would be getting initial funding from the office of the chief scientist in Israel. But at some point they need to commercialize and to ramp up, and that's when they're looking for the next round of investment. And that's where we can come in and assist them in that area and connecting them to investors. The other area, of course, is strategic partnerships, and strategic partnerships sometimes can serve as investors as well, but also, of course, being that they would already be established in the local markets, they can also then assist in providing logical partnerships depending on the nature of your business and the product and the service that you have. And then marketing services, and we'll talk a little bit more about each one of these, is all the other areas that you then move into, which is business development, sales, marketing, and so on. In terms of key deliverables, as I said, introduction and access to capital and venture funding is where we spend a lot of our initial time. In North America, Canada in particular, there are a lot of government grants and tax incentives that are made available to companies who are looking to establish a presence in the local market, and we have connections and in fact some partners who can help in assisting companies in getting some of those tax incentives. Things like SRED, and I guess we'll talk about each one of these in a little more detail. Research grants. We can also help in terms of distribution channels across Canada and the U.S. We introduce companies to strategic partners. And then the last component is the outsourced business development, sales, and marketing. And the next slide gives you a little bit more detail on that. We can help in things such as either assessing or actually helping you develop your go-to-market plan. We can help you build tactical programs to make sure that your business aligns with your potential customers. We can provide resources to manage both your international growth and local, and then help with things such as marketing plans, PR, analysts, and so on. And then finally, if and when you are ready to actually establish a presence in the local market, either Canada or the U.S., then we can assist with a number of the different infrastructure functions that would be necessary. And you see some of those on the next slide. Physical office, staffing, legal, tax, assessing federal, provincial, and accessing rather federal, provincial, and municipal grants. So the point here is everything happens in stages, everything happens in phases, and companies don't necessarily want to do all of these things. But the point is, whatever it is that we directly can't provide, we can certainly help provide through our network of resources, whether they be legal or staffing or otherwise. One of the advantages that we have, I've already mentioned, you can see on the left part of the screen, the access to vast network of industry contacts. That's certainly key. On the other end of the spectrum is the access to VC, private VC and government funding. But in the middle, we also have access to a very large cadre of students through Humber College, which, as Orna mentioned, is where I teach. And the students that I have are all international postgraduate students. In order for them to graduate, they have to have approximately 320 hours of volunteer work, if you will. And so students become very, very instrumental in helping us for companies. I'll talk about this a little bit more in the presentation, but clearly when you're moving into a new market, one of the first things you're going to do is try and do market research to understand what the market looks like, what the competitive landscape looks like, and so on. And so our students at Humber will do this for them. They need the hours, they need the experience in order to graduate. And for us, of course, it's very important because they can do a lot of that work, which typically companies would have to pay to do a lot of that market research work. So that's a huge advantage for us. And of course, this is an ongoing thing. Students are graduating and all the time, and there's always a fresh batch of students coming in. So we have continual access to what I consider to be a very important resource that we can provide to our clients in return. Some of our current engagements, this is a partial list. Many of these are Israeli companies. in different areas. I mentioned technology certainly being one of them, and biomedical being the other. A few of these are local companies, and some of them are distributors. For example, in the pharmaceutical area, Shoppers Drug Mart is one of the largest distributors here in Canada. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about that. But this is a partial list of some of the clients that we are currently working with. Okay, so let's get into actually doing business in North America. And the purpose here is to at least give you a pretty good idea of, especially from the investment point of view, and that's where we'll spend most of our time, what typically a company has to have if they're going to approach investors. There we'll provide a fair amount of detail here. But again, to be very clear, this is not sort of a one-size-fits-all, meaning that there's always going to be some changes in the material that you have to have and the way it's presented. But I think this is certainly based on our experience, a fairly good overview of what you can typically expect from in terms of questions and material and information that almost any investor or strategic partner or distributor is going to ask you. And this is where we'll spend most of our time during the presentation. So in terms of market entry objectives, first and foremost, of course, is investment. And certainly from our experience, that's usually the #1 priority of most companies. They're looking for investment for a number of reasons, either to complete their current R&D, but mostly it's to commercialize and to have the funds to be able to do business development, sales, and marketing, and so on. So investment, of course, is a very key part of their company strategy going forward. The next thing you look for are strategic partnerships, and then, of course, distribution into the market. The one I haven't mentioned, which is more than obvious, is, of course, ultimately getting to the end user, the client, because that's what's going to generate the revenue. But in order to get to that point, which is the end goal for every company, we have to go through the stages of investment in strategic partnerships and distribution. In terms of the investor checklist, now again, this is not a comprehensive list, but this is basic information that pretty well you have to provide, you can almost guaranteed you have to provide. Now, the gist of this presentation will actually get into the PowerPoint, which talks step by step about some of the information that you have to provide to an investor. But at a very, very high level, and then we'll drill down, clearly the type of information you have to have readily available is the amount of financing that you need. The tranches, meaning not every company necessarily wants or would be able to get all of the financing that they need right away. Excuse me. It would, you know, you may need 2, 3, 5, whatever it is, $10 million, but it may be over a period of time. So the investor will, of course, ask you how much is needed and then over what time frame. Many or most investors would be reluctant to necessarily provide all of the money up front. What they'd like to do is provide it in tranches, meaning they'll give you a certain amount now, and then as based on certain conditions that are met and progress and so on, they would then provide you with the next installment of money. Other questions that they're going to have to ask are things like investment, who the founders are, do you have any current investment already? So all of that detail is important, and again, I'll get more into that when we get into the PowerPoint slides. And then, of course, a detailed use of proceeds. So how are you going to use the money that you're asking for? The additional information is going to be things like market size, market potential. Every investor wants to know just how big the opportunity is, competitive offerings, do you have patents, regulatory approvals. In the case of biomedical and pharmaceuticals, specifically, there will be questions around clinical trials, paid pilots, do you have a detailed business plan, do you have a go-to-market plan, what is your time to market, and very important is an exit strategy. Now, whether you have long-term plans for an exit strategy or not is not the point. The point is there has to be some sort of a strategy. Now, that strategy can often be not necessarily exiting completely, but rather finding a strategic partner, whether it's one of the big players, Amgen or companies like that, that may at least potentially be interested in taking you out at some point down the road. So it's at least something you need to speak to during the presentation, and again we'll get into that. So there's a certain from our experience, there's a certain procedure or process that we usually go through with investors, and it works like this. Every company should have what we call a one-pager, and the next slide will detail some of the things that would go on a one-pager. But that's typically something that you would hand to an investor after they've been approached, saying, you know, we have a company, they have this and this product, and we'd be interested in getting a meeting with you or a conversation with you or a web conference, whatever it is. And so, of course, you would readily be able to provide them with a one-pager. The information on the one-pager isn't necessarily even under NDA. It's just enough information to give to the investor so they come back and say, okay, we'd be interested in a more detailed discussion. That's when you would move into the next phase, which is the PowerPoint presentation. And as I said, that's where we'll spend most of our time in this discussion, looking at some of the contents of what a PowerPoint presentation would look like. At that point, you would be signing an NDA because now you're getting into some more detail that, of course, you know, would be reserved specifically for the people that you're speaking to. If you get past that second phase, which is the PowerPoint presentation, that would then usually lead to the third one, which is a request from the investor for a very detailed business plan. And again, that is a presentation, a separate presentation in and of itself of what goes into a business plan, how to put together a business plan, and how to put together a marketing plan, and so on. But those are the three phases, the three stages, if you will, that almost always you would have to go through in your progressive discussions with an investor. Now, there's a lot of sub-events that, but clearly this is the template that you would typically follow. So a standard one-pager, and I apologize, it's a little difficult to see, but the one-pager simply says, you know, the company overview, a little bit about the solution that you offer, what the market opportunity is, some of the technology highlights, if that's irrelevant, depending on your product or service, at least identifying at a very high level who the competition is, what the business model is, meaning how you're going to generate revenue, your different revenue streams. And then on the left side of the page, you would look at things such as, you know, basic company information, who the key executives are, and some financial data. Again, at a very, very high level. And we'll get more into detail on this as we get into the presentation. That one pager more expanded, this is just really elaborating on what I just showed you. Finance objectives, key management of the company, this is very important, I'll come back to this as well. A short summary of the product, this is what you kind of call the elevator speech, which is the ability to summarize in 2 or 3 sentences or 30 seconds what your company's main product or service is. Then you get into things like the company solution, what problems you are solving for the industry, and how you're solving it. And again, this should be able to summarize this in 2 or 3 key sentences. The size of the company's market, because of course an investor is always thinking about, you know, just how big is this thing going to be and how much money I'm going to be able to make. And of course that will be a function of the size of the market. You would get at least into the competitive landscape, and then the financials. And the financials consist really of 2 parts. One is the basic numbers, which looks at current revenue if you have it, and then of course projected revenue over the next 3 or 4 years. And then the second part of it is what we call the use of proceeds, and that is, you know, the money that you're asking for, how it will be spent. And each one of these will get into details. So this is really the heart of the presentation. This is a investor PowerPoint presentation template. Now, in terms of prefacing this, I should emphasize again, this is a fairly general presentation template, although in my experience, most of these slides are very, very relevant. There are going to be some differences depending on the industry that you're in, depending on the product and the service that you offer, but you can be more or less assured that most of the questions in this PowerPoint template will come up at some point in time. So when you're preparing your presentation, this will be a very good source or reference for you to be able to make sure you've covered all of the bases. Now, in terms of guidelines, the investor presentation, and I don't think I'm telling you anything here that you don't already know, because most of it is common sense. The investor presentation obviously has to be very clear. It has to be concise. You have to essentially generate investor interest and build confidence. And the objective here is to lead to additional investor meetings. So let me just emphasize that. I've often experienced with many companies who try to do everything in one shot, and that isn't realistic. Your whole objective in your PowerPoint presentation is to provide enough information so that the investor says, I'm interested, I want to learn more. And that should lead to more detailed discussions. It would be a mistake to make your objective in that first or second meeting to say, okay, I'm going to close this investor and I'm going to spill out everything and tell him my entire life story. That is not the objective of these PowerPoint presentation. At this stage, you've got them interested enough, hopefully, that they want to listen and hear more, but it's really the detailed business plan and marketing plan which ultimately will decide for the investor whether they want to move ahead or not. So the objective here is don't make the presentation more than 20 or 30 minutes long. Make sure you cover the key points, but all you really want to do is walk away from the meeting with the investor saying, tell me more. And if you've done that, then you've achieved your objective. As it happened yesterday, I was attending a health investor conference, one of the larger ones here in Canada yesterday, and I made a point of sitting through many of the presentations by pharmaceutical companies who were pitching to investors. And each one of them was given 20 to 30 minutes, and they almost consistently, obviously these companies hadn't talked to each other, but consistently there was a certain format, a process that they walked through as they were presenting to the investors. And you'll see most of that covered here. And it was reassuring for me because it just, again, confirmed what I was expecting to hear and see in terms of what an investor wants to hear when these companies are presenting. Now, these were companies that were presenting pharmaceutical products, everything from a new product for prostate cancer to cardio products and so on. So there was a fair amount of consistency. But anyway, 20 to 30 minutes is what each one of them was allocated. It's always good to use charts and graphics and pictures as much as possible. In English here we use the expression of eye candy. Anything you can convey in charts and graphs and pictures is a lot more effective than words. Numerous market research will tell you that we tend to remember things that we see, graphics and charts and so on, a lot better than the reading through verbiage. So especially when it comes to things like the competitive landscape and trends and some of the financials, anytime you can present those in the form of a graph, it's going to be a lot more effective. Each slide should have no more than 3 or 6 bullets. This is not even so much an investor point. This is just basic good presentations, especially when it comes to PowerPoint. If you clutter too much information on one slide, you're going to lose them, so you have to be careful with that. Even the slide that I'm showing you probably has too much information, so this is not a good example. The presentation format was going to vary, but make sure, very important, that the story flows. Right? There's courses now being taught in university called The Art of Storytelling, and the whole idea is that when you are doing a PowerPoint, make sure that it is set up in a way that your story flows in a natural way, almost in the form of a story, because that's what people will remember the most. A typical order, a table of contents for your presentation. Again, start with the introduction, define the problem, talk about the solution, the market. You can read all of these for yourselves. And there are obviously subcategories in each one of these, and sometimes you will rearrange some of them, but in our experience, this is usually the type of flow that an investor is expecting to see. The one that's interesting, where I've seen 2 versions of the way it's presented, is the management team. I'll talk about this more when I get to that slide, but I cannot emphasize enough the importance of presenting the management team, because at the end of the day, the investor, no matter how good your product or your service is, ultimately it's the people that are going to be responsible for success or failure. So the investor spends a lot of time looking at the management team. So some companies will put the management team credentials right up front in their presentation. Others leave it towards the end. And there's an argument to be made really for both sides. Of course, when you present it up front, you establish immediate credibility and validation and so on. On the other hand, you know that we tend to remember best what we see last. And so therefore there is an argument to be made for putting the management team credentials at the end of the presentation, because that's what people will remember. And I can't emphasize enough the importance of really presenting a good, strong, solid management team. So let's go through each one of these in a little bit of detail. So introduction, of course, is briefly introduce yourself, your company, always provide, and this is really marketing 101, so I apologize if I'm making it a little too simplistic, but of course having the presenter name on the title, these are minor things, but you'd be surprised sometimes the minor things are the ones that people remember the most. And you're not spending really more than 30 seconds. Here the idea is really introducing yourself and just essentially explaining what your company does. I found yesterday in the presentations that I attended at this healthcare investor conference, it was very effective for companies to right up front get specific, and these are again mostly pharmaceutical companies, to speak right up front about the specific point or the specific solution that they are addressing. So, you know, the first company, a company by the name of ESSA Corporation, are developing a specific drug for certain forms of prostate cancer. And so right away up front they said, this is what we do. And that's effective because, of course, then you've got everybody's attention. I mean, given that you know, prostate is an issue for most of the, at least half of the audience who are male, and most of them are getting to the age where this becomes a factor. So it's a good way of immediately capturing somebody's attention, especially an investor, because you know, it rings a bell. It's relevant. So many of them provided this right up front, and then you know, there were other companies as well. There was another company that was had a drug that they're working for Parkinson's disease. Again, they mentioned that right up front because that got a lot of people's attention. But again, this is not more than a 30-second slide, essentially, just to get things going. The next slide is probably the one of the most important slides, and this one is, as you can see at the bottom, I've said is approximately a minute. But this is where you're really trying to give them the elevator pitch. You're all familiar with that term, and the idea is, what does my company do? What product or service does it offer? What problem am I solving? And why is it compelling? Why is my product unique and different than anything that's out there? So, and the ability to be able to narrow this down, to summarize it into 1 minute is very important, and that's why they typically refer to it as the elevator speech. The next slide would be identifying the problem, the opportunity, and the need. So explain immediately why there is what problem, or you know, as they say, what point of pain your product is addressing in the market, why the market needs it, and you know, why this is the right time for a solution. So, you know, in many cases, especially when I deal with technology companies, timing is key. So there's an ability to offer a service, let's say right now in 2016, which you would have loved to be able to offer in 2010, but the timing wasn't right, whether it was for technology reasons or anything else. So if you know, releasing the product right now is a timing issue, it's important to mention that and say why now is the right time for your product or solution as opposed to 4 or 5 years ago. And whenever you can, and this is a general rule during your presentation, always provide examples. People can relate to examples. So anytime you can provide a problem scenario, in other words, here was the issue, here was a problem, and is here how we are going to solve it. That's something that, again, whether it's an investor or a strategic partner, that's something that people can absorb and process very easily because you're giving them a real-life example. So anytime you can do that, it's always good to do that. Continuing with the solution, clearly describe the company's product or the service, the problem that you're addressing. Whenever you can, as I said earlier, provide an example. If you can use graphics or pictures, even videos as an illustration, that's important. But the key message, the key takeaway from this is keep it simple. Companies, especially in technology and in pharma and biomedical, tend to use a lot of medical terms or technology terms. Don't assume that everybody knows all the acronyms that you're familiar with. So spell it out, keep it simple. The investor is typically, educated, knows about the market that you're in, but keep it simple. Don't assume that they know everything that you do, because clearly they don't. They're approaching this from a business point of view as opposed to being necessarily subject matter experts. Provide a brief list of features and benefits, what your value proposition is. Describe things like the barriers to entry. This is a question you will almost guaranteed you will get asked by an investor, and that is, okay, so I like what you have a great product. How difficult will it be for a competitor to get into the market, whether it's immediately or 6 months down the road? So this is where you will talk about things like patents and intellectual properties and so on, all of those things that make it clear that it's not going to be easy for any competitor to get into the market and offer what you offer, at least in the foreseeable future. The solution, of course, is really providing an understandable, practical example of how your product service, how it works and what it does. And the next slide is really just a very simple way of doing that. Talk about the features of your product and then some of the associated benefits. This is a good time to mention that, and I'll mention this again towards the end of the presentation, clients, especially strategic partners, investors as well, ultimately what they're looking for is not the as they say in technology, the speeds and feeds of your product. They're looking for the benefits. The features are great, but I'm interested in how is this going to benefit? How is it going to benefit my company? How is it going to benefit mankind? Those are the kind of things. So always speak in terms of benefits, less focus on the ins and outs, the detailed medical or technological aspects of your product, and more about the benefits that it provides. Talk about the company status and progress would be the next section of your presentation. Here what you're trying to do is build investor confidence, clearly demonstrate that you have subject matter expertise, that you are the experts in this product, in this area. If you have customer contracts or references, even LOIs, very, very important. That establishes credibility and validation. So anytime you have any of that, make sure that's part of your presentation. If you already have strategic partnerships established, make sure you throw that in there as well, especially if they are well-recognized names. So, one of the companies that we're dealing with is trying to get a pilot going with one of the well-known pharmaceuticals in North America. Anytime you can name drop one of those names, whether it's a Pfizer or an Amgen or whatever, this of course too gives you immediate validation and credibility. Talk about product development status, describe milestones, talk about how you are reducing some of the risks that you would anticipate, talk about alpha and beta testing and so on. And anything else, any other information that's going to help you validate or reduce the risk. Okay, to the next slide here, sorry. Okay, the global market demand for your product. You may not have all of this information, and again, with all of these slides, not all of it, not every slide is going to be relevant to each one of your presentations, but I think this is a pretty good template for you to look at least. So if you can, and this is where market research comes in, of course, is for being to be able to provide some data for the demand for a product like yours in a specific market, Asia, Europe, North America, Latin America. You can break that down into more detail, of course. North America could be, Canada, US, Mexico, Latin America, of course, can be specific countries. It depends how detailed you want to get, and it depends on how much information you have or how much information you can obtain. But the whole objective here is really to, because when you're presenting this, the you know, the people who are potentially the investors are their mind is working, and they're doing mathematical computations of just how big the market is and how big the opportunity is. So the more numbers you can throw at them, the better, because that helps them process what the you know, the size of the market is and how much revenue can be generated. If you have customers, describe the company's current and potential customers. This is good even before you have a customer. What is useful here is providing the profile of what a typical customer could look like. Because if you do that, again, for the investor, then say, okay, well, this is a customer that would be, I don't know, between the age of 40 and 50. They would be male, they have this and this and that. And so therefore you can very easily extrapolate to start to see how big the market might be. So if you can profile what the optimal customer looks like, that helps the investor start to do the math and estimate just what the potential is. Clearly articulate what the value proposition is to the customer. And again, the customer may be your end customer here, it may be your distributor, it may be your strategic partner, whatever it is, make sure you can articulate what is in it for them. And that's always the name of the game. It's not, don't talk about what's in it for you, talk about what's in it for them, because that's who you're trying to get to. Validation of customer acceptance. Again, if you have any customer feedback, if you have survey data, if you have testimonials, if you have LOIs, any of that is very useful, and that goes a long way in alleviating any concerns that the investor might have about, you know, you guys are new and unproven and so on. So more of this type of information you can provide, the better it is. And if you have an example of customers, that's all the better. Competition. So whether you have direct competition, indirect competition, make sure that's clearly spelled out, because that demonstrates to the investor that you have an understanding of the market. The worst answer I've heard from companies that are presenting, the one that no investor wants to hear is, we have no competition, because there is no such thing as no competition. They may not be head-to-head, they may not be as good as your product, but there's always competition. And so your ability to understand and recognize that there is competition, but here is why we are better, that's the way you want to approach this, rather than just say we're unique and so on. Describe the strength, the weaknesses, and opportunities related to competition. This is what we know, something I certainly teach with, to all my students, is the ability to put together a detailed SWOT analysis. And again, it demonstrates to the investor that you know not only your product, but you understand the market, you understand the competition. The more detailed you can get here, the more, shall we say, they will be impressed, because the more it demonstrates you really understand the market that you're playing in. Describe how your product, your technology is going to be different from the competition, and that's why I say very important. You know, what are the competitive advantages? The best way always to show this is through a matrix or a graph, and I've illustrated that in the next slide. So, and I always we always urge our clients to come up with something like this. So list your product, list 5, 6, 7, 8 features that one would typically want to see in that product, and then list your product and the competition, and what they have and what you have, and hopefully you have more dots and more boxes than that of the competition. But it's important to show this, and this is always an effective way of showing it in the form of a matrix, because I think that's a lot, people remember that and understand it a lot more readily than if you were doing it through just words. Competitive positioning, again, this is very open, but it shows, and it's quite you know, subjective as to what you want to put on your vertical axis and on your horizontal axis. It could be price. In this case, it's functionality versus flexibility. It could be price. It could be any number of things. And then position where your product would be in that matrix or in that quadrant versus that of some of the competitors. The business model and the marketing plan, this again is a very key part of your presentation. This is where of course, you're really getting into how big is the opportunity, how much money can everybody make in all of this, and this is really where, assuming you've got the investor's attention, this is where they start to make the calculations, whether it's on paper or in their heads. So describe the company's business and revenue model. Hopefully, if you have multiple revenue models, revenue streams, that's important to emphasize that. How you're going to sell the product, how you're taking it to market. Are you going direct? Are you using distributors? Things of that nature. Describe the marketing plan. At this stage, you hopefully have already started to work in the background on a detailed business and marketing plan. So you don't necessarily have to go into the details at the PowerPoint level. This would be more, shall we say, the sort of the Rashi Prakim, the main categories of what you're going to talk about. Your overall go-to-market strategy, the pricing model, how you're going to get to your customers, in other words, what channels of communication are you going to use, customer support, things of that nature. If there, yeah, so that was that. Regulatory issues, and this is very relevant to business, the pharmaceutical business. Clearly, if you are either already applying for FDA or you already have FDA, Health Canada if you're doing business in Canada, CE if you're doing business in Europe, and so on. Any of these things that you already have from a regulatory point of view will be important, so you want to be able to show that you have those or you're in process, or at least to establish some timelines of when you're planning to get these. Okay, the next slide is the one I referred to earlier, which I can't emphasize enough, is the management team, the advisors, the board of directors. Now, what you want to show here, and I saw this demonstrated over and over again, even as recently as yesterday during the presentations, there's two components to a good management team, especially in the pharmaceutical area. One is people who are, have the subject matter expertise. They are the chief medical officer. They understand, they're typically PhDs with medical backgrounds and so on. That's the one side of the team that you want to talk about. The other side of the team are the business people. They may not necessarily be PhDs or doctors or whatever, but they understand business. And so these are the people, these would be your CFOs and your CTOs and so on. And it's important to build the investor confidence with the team that you have. So provide credentials, provide some of the past successes that members of the team have had, describe skills and experiences and so on. And if you don't necessarily have all the skills, that's okay, as long as you identify, here's what we have, here's what we still need, because quite frankly, part of the proceeds that you're going to get from the investor may be used to fill those gaps. And that's okay, because at least you understand what you have and what you don't have and what still needs to be filled. List the company's leadership team, names, position, previous experience, credentials, and so on. It's always good to have a company of directors and advisors. These are people who, again, come from the industry, who are not only providing perhaps funding, but also can provide very good connections into other parts of the industry which would be relevant to you. So again, include the name, the summary, and the experience. So that's the people, and as I said, I can't emphasize enough the importance of really stating that clearly what your management team is made up of, because I've spoken to hundreds of investors in the past, and that's always the big issue of, who am I giving my money to, and who is it that, what experience do they have, and is my money going to be safe with these people? So it's important to establish the credentials. The financial projections, again, I think is something you already know. Include 3 to 5 year projections, year-to-year growth. Talk about where you see the company financially in a year from now, 2 years from now, when you think you're going to break even, and so on. Always state assumptions and so on. So whatever numbers you put up, it's okay as long as you can back them up and as long as you can support them. So assumptions are very key. This is just an example. At some point you're going to get into a lot more detail than this very high level, but it's a good start to at least to give the investor an idea of what the revenue is going to look like, your operational expenses, the burn rate. These are all questions that you're going to be asked, so make sure you have this information readily available. The break-even analysis, I did this over a sequence of slides, so I apologize, but clearly one of the things that the investor is going to want to see is, when do I start to see an ROI on my money? So if you can show that, and again, if you can show it in the form of a graph, that becomes that much more useful and important. Now, funding, and this is where you really get into what funding you have received year to date. It's important because if you already have funding, regardless of the sources, it shows that other people believe in your company and have already invested. This is, by the way, just as an aside, where it becomes interesting when we talk about the North American market. So as much as there's a lot of commonality between American and Canadian investors, since we're talking about North America, there are some subtle but interesting differences. Canadian investors tend to be more conservative than American ones, and therefore they will invest, but they usually don't want to be the first one. So one of the first questions they'll always ask you is, have you got funding already and from whom, and have you got any references and installations and so on. Not to say that an American investor won't ask those questions either, but they'll be a little more aggressive and a little more forthcoming in terms of providing funding without necessarily having all of that information. But the point is, any funding that you do have, it's important to show that, and then talk about how the company is going to be financed going forward, and this is where you get into use of proceeds. How much money am I asking for? What am I going to do with the money over what period of time, and so on. And show that you understand what your future needs are, not only the immediate needs for your company, but what you're going to need 2 years, 3 years, 4 years down the road, whatever it is. And then show what the expected ROI is for the investors. I mentioned earlier an exit strategy. Whether your exit strategy is to be in this business forever or to get out at some point is less the point. More to the point is that you have a strategy. That strategy says, who am I going to be important to, and is it, if, for example, if you're technology, one of the companies that I worked for, we developed a mobile platform, which is eventually we were taken out by Motorola. Now, at the time, we had plans to be around for a very long time, but we understood that the big companies like Motorola at the time and others would be interested in what we had to offer. That's a very important point for an investor, that they want to see that you have an exit strategy, because it shows that you're a player and that you would be relevant to some other players in the industry. So, spend a couple of minutes on this, because this is important. There's different ways you can look at in terms of use of proceeds, and of course the categories are going to be different depending on the nature of your business and so on. These are some of the headings: salaries, marketing, accounting and legal, and so on. This is fairly straightforward, and as I said, there's different versions of this. But again, the point here is if you can show it in the form of a matrix or a chart, it's going to be that much more effective. And then, a pie chart that conveys the same type of information is always useful. This is more of the graphics and the sort of the eye candy that I referred to earlier. Timelines: use Gantt charts to show where you are in terms of the development in the area of pharmaceuticals. Talk about whether you're in phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and the most effective way to show that is in the form of a Gantt chart or something like that. Microsoft has a number of applications that you can use. But again, here you're showing that you have, you're not only focused on today, but you have a game plan and you understand what needs to be done. Usually this is shown in quarters, in other words, what's happening in the next 90 days, 180 days, and so on, and use this type of a Gantt chart to demonstrate this. So a summary, and this is a summary of the PowerPoint presentation. What do you want your audience to remember about the company? I've listed a couple of things. They may vary depending on what your product is, but think about that. They say always begin a journey with the end in mind, and that is, at the end of the journey, what is it that you want the investors to remember, to walk away with, and that usually forms your summary. And make sure you have a summary slide that really brings all of that together, so that's what's left in their mind when you end the presentation. The other two components we talked about, and these I'll just mention very briefly. So everything till now is really focused on the investor. Sometimes that investor, by the way, can also provide strategic partnerships. So There's a number of tips for developing strategic partnerships, and I think you'll see and agree that most of these are fairly logical and common sense. Clearly, you need to find the right strategic partner. Make sure, just the way you would be looking for your key hires or co-founders or key executive team, use the same criteria for screening and finding the right strategic partner. Establish clear objectives, and by that I mean that make sure all parties are on the same page in terms of where you want to go. Be honest about your own strengths and weaknesses. Understand what makes your business unique and how 1 and 1 equals 3 when you are forming a strategic partnership. And then do your research, do your homework. Make sure you're picking the best possible partners. And last but not least is keep communications open at all times. A checklist. Look at the synergies between the two companies. Certainly the strategic partner is going to want to know things like, is this going to open new markets for me that previously were not necessarily accessible, and that's why I want to do business with this partner. Does this new partner provide products that come with additional competitive advantages? And of course, they too will want to see a detailed business plan and a detailed go-to-market plan. And that's going to be a common thread throughout the whole presentation, and regardless of who you're speaking with. Distribution channels is the same thing. Evaluate how your end user is going to need to buy. Match end users to distribution strategy. Identify the right partners. Build your distribution channel. Minimize pricing conflicts. This is very important. Companies that have a direct sales force have to be very careful in terms of, if you have a direct sales force and you have a channel that you're also selling the product to, make sure there's no conflict. And oftentimes pricing is the key issue, so make sure you have pricing such that it's a win-win for everybody. And then of course try to drive revenue through that channel as much as possible, otherwise they're not going to be with you for very long. And then distributor checklist, the questions you can anticipate. Almost every distributor is going to, if they like what you have, first thing they'll ask you is, can we have exclusivity? And usually my answer to that is exclusivity has a price. So, and there's terms and conditions. Something you want to be careful with, and that is not simply giving up exclusivity because you want to get something right away. Be careful, because if you truly believe in what you have, then giving away exclusivity is going to come back to bite you. So exclusivity comes with a price tag. Usually put time limits on it as well. In other words, if you are going to give exclusivity, give it for a limited period of time. Give it perhaps based on geographic territories rather than giving them the world or even a complete country or area, whatever it is. So those are important things that you're going to get asked, to make sure you have your answers well prepared in terms of what you are prepared to do and give away and what you aren't. Look at solution synergies. Look at things like, does this open new markets for me, similar to what we had with the strategic partners. Look at competitive offerings and again, the detailed business plan and the go-to-market plan. The standard collateral, and I think this we've talked about a lot of this. Make sure your website is always updated. And I appreciate the fact, especially in the areas of technology, where new companies want to fly under the radar for as long as possible. So you don't want to give away and disclose too much information. But the fact of the matter is, especially if you're talking to an investor, the first thing they'll do after they've finished a conversation with you is type in www and go somewhere. So even if you only have minimal information, but have something there, show that you have a website. And of course, if you pass the stage of flying under the radar, then update and keep it updated with information on a regular basis. The one-pager we've talked about, the PowerPoint presentation we've talked about, the detailed business plan and the go-to-market plan. These are really discussions and presentations in and of themselves that will take a lot of time. These are separate categories. And then make sure you have the other standard material, NDAs, shareholder agreements. So if you're trying to get investors, whether they're private investors or whatnot, make sure you have something that they can read, review, and sign. Make sure your patents are in order if you have them. Make sure you have paper documentation or digital that provides evidence of regulatory approvals and so on. In terms of the market strategy, again, usually what happens is the first thing you do is you go into a market and you're doing the market research. And this is an area where, as I mentioned earlier, we can certainly help. You identify your strategic partners. These are really summary slides, the key distributors. very important. Whenever you can, secure early pilots, even if you have to give away the initial the business just to get early references and early pilots is very important, because it's one of the things that establishes validation and credibility, and it's certainly something we always encourage our clients to do, is secure early pilots, because you know, as they say in the world of sales, a good sales reference is 70% of your sales effort. So anytime you can point to a happy pilot or a good customer reference is very important. Identify your key industry events, your key industry associations. Make sure your company has what they call the evangelists, the people who are the subject matter experts that can talk about your product, your service, and so on. And then ultimately what you want to do is establish a local presence. And I made the note here of experience. The sort of the fly-by sales and marketing does not work. The idea of, you know, I'll come and visit you every couple of months. You're in Europe, I'm in Israel, or you're in Canada, I'm in whatever country. You need local presence. Customers want to be able to have a local number that they can dial. They want to have people that they can talk to face, and that's why it's very important. And again, it'll vary in what form and degree you wish to have a local presence, but some sort of local presence is absolutely essential, and so something to that we strongly encourage. And just as a summary, important caveats: understand, and I say this a little bit of tongue-in-cheek because I've dealt with a lot of Israeli companies who have usually, especially in the area of technology, the technology is always second to none. Anything that comes out of Israel has worldwide respect in terms of quality and so on. But understand that at the end of the day, your clients, especially if you're looking for the big strategic partners, anything you have is positioned as an enabler. At the end of the day, it's about, you know, how is this going to help me get more customers and generate more revenue? So talk less about whether it's the medical or the technological aspect of what you have, and talk about the business benefits, how it's going to generate new revenue streams, how it's going to give you a competitive advantage, how it's going to increase market share. The end goal is always customers, because customers equals revenue. So the focus of your messaging, the focus of your discussions should always be on the end result, which is the business benefits or the medical benefits, how it's going to save mankind, whatever it is, but that's what people want to hear. Of course, in order to do that, you have to have something that's unique and different, but the emphasis has to be on how it's going to get you or your strategic partner more customers and therefore more revenue. That's the gist of my presentation. I am happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Well, Simi, thank you very, very much for a very interesting presentation. There's a question and a request here. The request is that you would go back to your first slide, which is actually a summary or a checklist of the entire, okay. And my question to you then would be, would you allow us to send the first slide or some of the presentation to the audiences so that they can make use of it? So,
yeah, I mean, you know, this is fairly general information. We'll check with my partner, of course, but I don't think we would have a problem with that.
okay.
Now, which slide, Orna, were you referring to?
I think it's the first slide that gives a more. They said first slide, but I think it's the first slide with the checklist. If you go forward.
Yes, the checklist?
Yeah.
Or should I keep going here?
Yes, please. Yeah, I think, no, go backwards one, I think. Yeah, I think that's it. One pager.
Okay, all right, yeah. All right, was it work?
Mail, would you like us to show another slide? Not this one? Please write it to me. I don't see it. So meanwhile, while Mail tells us what slide did he refer to, I have another question, and that is how you help perhaps Israeli companies to collaborate with Canadian universities and doing some research in North America?
So that's one of the services that we can provide. So as I mentioned, directly I have access to my own students, and I typically have teaching 2 or 3 courses. I have about 150 students. Not all of them are necessarily qualified, but that's one of the services we can provide. If there is specific market research that needs to be done, they would work with us, and then we can engage the students. That's something we will do on their behalf. So the short answer is to work through us, and we can provide that type of research.
Okay, great. So no, the
One thing before I forget, because I made a note of mentioning this, my partner Sam Carmon will be in Israel in a couple of weeks, and he will go into more detail.
Next week.
Next, okay. But in any case, Sam will get into more detail about the services that we can provide, and the services that Canada can provide. So we'll get into more details about some of the things that I've discussed at the higher level. But I just want to make sure everybody was aware that Sam will be in Israel, and there will be a face-to-face opportunity to meet with him.
Yeah. Well, every one of you will get a note that you will be able to meet Sam on the 17th, I think it is. Let me make sure. Here in Israel on the 17th of May. So if anyone wishes to meet Sam here in Nexstar, you're welcome to contact us about it, and we'll schedule such a meeting. In any case, for now, thank you very, very much for an interesting talk. I'm sure we all learned from it. And we'll see you here in Israel.
Yeah, I hope so, sooner than later. Thank you very much for the opportunity. You have my contact details at the back of the presentation, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions.
Excellent. Thank you very, very much, and have a good day.
All right.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.